let's get into the story of Politico. And you tweeted about it, and it's all about, here's the headline. It says, no one went for a knockout blow inside Bernie's campaign's nosedive. Sanders' unwillingness to go for Biden's jugular or his nose, chest, or mouth. Really, he forgot to throw a punch entirely. It's just one of the decisions campaign aides are wrestling with since he exited the primary on Wednesday. Despite being the best fundraiser in the Democratic field, boy, he raised more money in February than Biden raised altogether. Despite being the best fundraiser in the Democratic field, having near universal name ID, and leading a massive volunteer army, Sanders performed worse in many ways in 2020 than in 2016. He badly lost among African Americans yet again, and the rural and working class white voters who were with him 4 years ago abandoned him. So Bernie's losing support left and right. According to interviews with more than 20 Sanders aides, surrogates, and top allies, many believe he should have been more aggressive in taking on Biden, including over the idea that he was more electable in November, which is kind of the whole point of a campaign. A campaign's whole point is in a primary is to convince the voter that I'm going to beat our opponent and he's not. That's one of the biggest things you're trying to do, your electability, and downplay your opponent's electability. But what did Bernie Sanders do when he was asked about it?
Do you think, say it is Biden, do you think Biden can beat Trump?
I do.
So that's it. He forfeited the race when he did stuff like that. They also complained about the campaign's organizing strategy. Its inability to win over black and senior voters. Though nearly everyone in Sanders' circle felt that the media and political establishments played critical roles in taking him down, they still think the nomination was in reach, because it was. Sadly, we did not get to a place of convincing a large number of people that he was the most, quote-unquote, electable choice. Yeah, we really gave it a shot, but try as we may, we just couldn't come across as more electable than a segregationist with rape allegations and dementia. I don't know what I was couldn't do it. How could you make yourself look more electable than a guy who's actually visibly demented, doesn't know where he is, can't finish a sentence, and has a horrible record? So here, it turned into a superficial media perception of safe, electable Biden versus revolutionary Bernie Sanders. And I think that dynamic kind of hurt. Again, I'll point you to Bernie Sanders literally killing his own campaign and campaigning for Joe Biden on NBC. Some Sanders aides thinks he should have used the period between Nevada and South Carolina to appear presidential and broaden his appeal, including to seniors. That was the idea behind a sit-down interview he did with Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes. Instead, he spent much of his time doubling down on defending positive comments he made in the 1980s about Cuban dictator Fidel Castro's education program. Now, let me just stop there for a second and say, this is a failing of Bernie personally and his campaign to fail to get him ready for stuff like, if you saw his interview with Whoopi Goldberg, he let Whoopi Goldberg, adult, an idiot, box his ears in with a 4-year-old question. How come you didn't work hard enough for Hillary Clinton, and why are you still in the race? Those are the two questions they knew they were going to ask him when he got on that show, and he looked like an open micer comedian. He didn't know how to answer it, and he was on his heels the whole time. What he didn't look like was a leader who could be president, and that's what Whoopi Goldberg exposed. Because what he should have said to Whoopi Goldberg is, the reason why I'm still in this race is because I actually have a solution for the problem we're facing right now, and Joe doesn't. Do you have a solution, Whoopi? And then you put it back on her, and then she looks like the idiot she actually is, and you look like a leader who's in command of a situation, and you could actually handle a question from a moron on daytime television. Let me go back to you, Aaron, get you, just jump in this point. Did you see that interview with him or with Whoopi Goldberg?
That was so sad. I was thinking, why does he bother going on these shows with these people who are so disingenuous? And that speaks to, look, the fundamental, I think, mistake that Bernie's people make, whether they just didn't want to come to grips with it or they just thought they could kill everybody with kindness, I don't know. But they didn't recognize that all these people, whether it's Whoopi Goldberg or whether it's the executives at MSNBC that this Politico article says they met with to try to convince them that Bernie was a great guy. They didn't recognize that all these people are their class enemies. These people aren't, MSNBC isn't in business to cover the presidential campaign properly. And if you go there and you talk to them nicely, they're going to treat you fairly. They're there to destroy any threat to the corporate establishment. And Bernie Sanders, by mobilizing people around real issues, was an actual threat. And instead of trying to win them over by, believing that possibly they'd be nice to you, Bernie should have treated them with the same contempt that Donald Trump treated the rest of the Republican establishment when he won the nomination in 2016. I mean, that was the key to Donald Trump's success, is he tapped in to the anger he saw in his base towards the establishment, and he went with it. He didn't pretend to be friends with these people. And Bernie Sanders, and refusing to go after Joe Biden and refusing to really take on the corporate establishment while still claiming he was leading a revolution, it just didn't make sense. It didn't work.
So I agree with you. Moving on, Aide said that weakened his case, that his appearance on Anderson Cooper's 60 Minutes segment. Aide said that weakened his case on the single most important issue to Democratic voters, beating President Donald Trump. The single most important issue facing primary voters was, can you beat Donald Trump? And this guy couldn't help but do this every time he opened his mouth.
Can beat Trump?
I do.
Jeez. Some staffers believe Sanders also should have done more to break through on electability, an issue that was even more important to older and African-American voters, among whom he was the weakest. He never conducted focus groups on the issue or any issue because of a dislike of such campaign tactics. Oh, my God. Jane Sanders, the senator's wife and closest advisor, acknowledged that there was more they could have done to persuade people that he was as electable as Biden. The facts were on our side. We didn't do it well enough. That is something we should have done better. Yeah, the facts were on our side. Stadiums full of people, record numbers of volunteers. Just a few things were on your side. Yeah. So here's the part that is really right up our alley here. Bernie Sanders had expected to spend more time in South Carolina, where African Americans cast more than half the vote in Democratic primaries, in the weeks before the primary there. So Bernie was expecting to go hit it hard in South Carolina before the primary. But the senator had to scale back those plans due to the impeachment proceedings. He said people familiar with his schedule, some of Sanders' advisors and allies, felt that especially hurt him, because he tended to do better with voters who saw him up close. Buttigieg's ultimate victory in rural parts of Iowa helped him run up the delegate score and win Iowa. Claire Sandberg, Sanders' national organizing director, felt that the campaign leadership should have hired more field staff earlier in 2019 across states, including Iowa, according to a person familiar with her thinking. Others said that Sanders should have visited more rural areas there. A planned campaign swing in rural Iowa was scrapped because of impeachment. So now there's impeachment and Russiagate, both things Bernie Sanders supported, coming back to undermine his campaign, as predicted by a Jagoff nightclub comedian in his garage. Aaron?
Yeah, you know what, Jimmy? This is where I actually want to acknowledge where you were correct about something and I was not. So obviously both of us hated Russiagate, and we also dissed its sequel, Ukrainegate, and thought it was a joke from the start. And a lot of people thought we were crazy for both. But I always kind of defended Bernie's decision not to basically adopt our stance and stand up and say that Russiagate is a joke and so is impeachment, because I thought that it was a tactical decision and that the costs of him pushing back would be so big, because then the establishment would hate him even more and make his life even more miserable and reduce his campaign to just talking about how he, catered to Vladimir Putin and all this sort of stuff like that. So that it wasn't worth the headache. But I'm seeing now that because Bernie enabled all of this, then it was so normalized inside the party that there was no space for him to exist, because everybody was consumed by this idea that we have to get that Donald Trump is this unique force of evil, and he's the only problem. So whoever can beat him is the choice, and we're being told that Joe Biden is the choice, so we have to go with that. So there was no room for Bernie to operate in that. And one other consequence of that was, just as we warned about, we were very vocal about this back in the fall when we did segments about impeachment, and I wrote about this too, that one of the many predictable consequences of Democrats embracing impeachment was that it was going to overshadow the Democratic primary, a very exciting primary, where Bernie Sanders was presenting some ideas that hadn't been debated in a Democratic primary in many years. And exactly what happened, not only did impeachment overshadow this, it literally displaced Bernie Sanders physically from the campaign trail. And we see in this Politico article, concrete examples where that seriously hurt him. And that's one aspect of this tragedy.
Well, here's what you actually tweeted. You said, if your Bernie postmortem isn't acknowledging that the Democratic establishment spent 3+ years hyperventilating about Russia and then using it to both sideline, e.g. protests for Jeff Sessions instead of protests for Medicare for all, and taint Bernie's agenda, Nevada vote Eve, you're missing something big. So the point those are great points you talked to. Go ahead, and you want to expand on that.
Well, something we've talked about forever is that to understand Russiagate and Ukrainegate, this was not just a way for the Democratic Party to narrowly resist Donald Trump without confronting the real reasons for his victory in 2016. This also was a way of resisting the appeal of Bernie Sanders to a wider voting population, because the message of 2016 was that to have success, you have to run as an anti-establishment candidate. So on the Republican side, the winner was Donald Trump, who presented himself falsely as being anti-establishment. On the Democratic side, who was the anti-establishment candidate? It was obviously Bernie Sanders. So Democrats, the ones who lost to Trump, needed a way to basically resist not just Trump, but also Bernie Sanders' appeal. And since they have nothing to offer voters at all that can compete with Bernie Sanders' policies, they needed something like this 3 years of hyperventilating about Russia. And that's what they did. And Bernie Sanders, in going along with it, he could have said, imagine if he had said, you know what, I'm not sure exactly what Russia did or didn't do. And I'm not sure, maybe there were some Trump people who met with Russia. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But the evidence for it is not there. And the attention that is being paid on it right now is not justified, when meanwhile we have tens of thousands of people dying every year because they don't have health care. And we also have a Democratic Party establishment that is pushing this, that was rejected in this election. And we need to listen to the voices of the people who rejected them. Yes. Because but he didn't do that. He basically, whether it was out of serious conviction or political calculation, he decided to go along with it. And that dealt him a huge blow, because he gave legitimacy to something that was fundamentally stupid and also fundamentally corrupt, because it wasn't just about a fake resistance to Trump. It was also about trying to resist Bernie Sanders' rise. And unfortunately, he went along with it.
Yes. As Michael Tracy pointed out, he's Russiagating himself. And which was amazing to see, because right before the eve of that primary, the Washington Post story dropped about Russia propping up Bernie Sanders, and so now he's handcuffed. What is he supposed? He can't do. He's got nowhere to go. He's already agreed with that narrative that Russia's propping him up. It's just nuts. And instead of joining with Tulsi Gabbard, who actually pushed back against Russiagate and the intelligence community's effect on our elections, and the media and the intelligence community working together and making assertions like Russiagate without any evidence, she said they have to show evidence for it. I mean, if Bernie would have did that, he could have maybe nipped this in the bud 3 years ago and said, hey, you have to have evidence before you start making assertions. We have to have the same standard for him as we have for ourselves. And he never did any of that. And in fact, he sounds just as dumb as Adam Schiff does on any given day when he talks about Donald Trump or Russia.
Well, I don't agree with that, because Adam Schiff is at a higher level of unhinged just craziness. But he did it was disingenuous, because I didn't even sound believable.
No.
At this and like the notion, accepting this fundamental notion that even if everything Russia was accused of is true, which when it comes to the stealing the emails, I don't even think it is. But whatever, even if it is, this idea that Russia is attacking our democracy and installing Trump in the White House. It was ridiculous, and it was insulting to people's intelligence. And Bernie didn't stand up against it. And, not only did he not push back against it, I think Max Blumenthal already said this on your show, but Max, my colleague at the Gray Zone, went to to an event with Matt Duss,
yes,
who was Bernie Sanders' top foreign policy advisor. This is after Bernie got Russiagated on the eve of the Nevada vote. And Max asked Matt Duss whether the Bernie Sanders campaign saw this supposed intelligence that claimed that Russia is supporting Bernie Sanders in 2020. And Matt Duss told Max, it's on tape, that yes, and we thought the intelligence was convincing.
The intelligence, meaning the convincing intelligence that Bernie's foreign policy advisor was saying was convincing, was the intelligence that said that Bernie was being propped up by Russia.
Yeah. So basically, you have formally co-signing the intelligence and saying, and going, and so it's just, there was it's a combination of, credulity, cowardice, careerism. Nobody wants to go up against the establishment and say this whole Russiagate thing is a scam. It's being done not to take on a real threat, but to basically prop up the people who lost to Donald Trump, and for the national security state to undermine Trump for their own narrow interests. And all of this, as we saw from Russiagate through impeachment, is done in the service of a dated and dangerous Cold War agenda, where Adam Schiff is talking about saying that we are arming Ukraine so that we can fight Russia over there and not fight them over here, and everybody's going along with that. It's the most right-wing Cold War reactionary thing possible. And yes, Bernie not going up against that and recognizing that ultimately a major part of its goal was to blunt the success of his message and to keep the Democrats from moving into a genuine progressive party and keep them, scare people into submission by fear-mongering about Russia, for Bernie not to push back against that and to have left it to people like Tulsi Gabbard and people like us.
Yes,
was a very big mistake, because there's, look, we reached the people that we could reach. There's only so much we could do. And unfortunately, look, and this is where the rest of the progressive media played a very big role, because, the progressive media is actually a lot freer than Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is under political pressures. There's all, he's playing a different ballgame. The progressive media is a part of a supposedly free media. And we're also on the left. And we're supposed to be standing up for progressive ideas. But yet, you saw, and you have very intimate experience with this, Jim. You have been at the Young Turks. You saw progressive outlet after progressive outlet buying into it, and basically buying into a program and an agenda that was being used deliberately to undermine a real progressive candidate, a real progressive movement. And we saw that when it came to the campaign and the primary, it was just too late, because when Bernie got Russiagated, he himself didn't have the capacity to push back. He went along with it. And all of the time that we could have spent actually fighting over his ideas was spent instead fear-mongering about Vladimir Putin and stupid Russian social media ads.
But but Aaron, the reason why we didn't fight over Donald Trump's ideas and what he was actually doing was because the Democratic establishment actually went along with it. And so Bernie just went along with all that. And it's just like, what is the point of electing progressives and giving them power if they just go along with the bullshit anyway? What is the point? Like the Squad and Ro Khanna and everybody just voted for this stimulus bill that screws the workers and helps the corporations. And what is the point of voting for people who don't take corporate money if they bend the knee to the people who do anyway? The answer is there is no point.
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I don't, because then we're basically handing over the country to a complete corporate takeover.
They just did that. How is it different with having the Squad vote for the stimulus bill 3 than fucking not having them there? There is no difference than having them there.
You vote for whoever is the least worst, and then you push them in the direction that you can. That you do what you've been doing, and I respect what you've been doing.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?